Welcome to the Carnivore Cast, a podcast focused on the carnivore diet and lifestyle, with practical advice from successful carnivores, citizen scientists, and top researchers. I'm your host, Scott Meslinski, and I'm here to speak with experts and experienced carnivores to get answers to your biggest and meatiest questions while helping you live your best life as a carnivore. If you've followed this podcast for long enough, you'll know I'm obsessed with my sleep. Good sleep is incredibly essential for not only our physical recovery, but also mental acuity, creativity, well-being, and longevity. It affects everything we do. One change I've made in my life that has dramatically improved my sleep is blocking blue light in the evening with blue blocking glasses by Blue Blocks. Exposing ourselves to unnatural blue light from not just screens and devices, but also lamps and lights in our homes or outside stops our body from making melatonin and prevents us from getting deep restorative sleep. Blue Blocks lenses are the only ones to be lab tested to block 100% of both blue and green spectrum light. They're actually very stylish. I've had several compliments on the Kent pair I own, and my wife loves the Stellas. They're incredibly high quality, and they donate a pair of reading glasses through Restoring Vision to those in need for every pair sold. Get yours today with code CARNIVORE15, all uppercase, no spaces, at BLUBLOX.com to look great, get better sleep, and support the show. Thanks. This episode is a very long time coming, and I'm super excited to have this guest on. Zack Moore at Zack M Fitness or ZM Carnivore on Instagram is a fitness/lifestyle coach at Precision Nutrition, head of strength and conditioning for Nourish Balance Thrive, and a carnivore. Before joining Precision Nutrition, Zack was a full-time strength coach at Indianapolis Fitness and Sports Training, named one of the top 10 gyms in the U.S. by Men's Health magazine in 2009 and 2010, and co-owned by Bill Hartman and Mike Robertson. He's previously worked with Martin Berkhan of Leangains and programmed for the Ketogains bootcamps. Zack holds a host of certifications in training and nutrition. He's one of the smartest and most thoughtful people in the space that I know, and that's why after meeting him at the Carnivore Conference in Boulder last year, he became my personal coach. Welcome to the show, Zack.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Scott. I'm excited to be here, and I'm a big fan of the podcast.
Thank you. Well, let's start with, where did your interest in fitness and training begin? Curious to hear that.
Yeah. So it's kind of a long story, to be honest. I mean, I was always very active growing up. I mean, I played pretty much every sport that my school offered. I mean, basketball, baseball, football, golf, tennis. We even had a ski resort in my town. So I was a snowboard instructor in high school, skateboarding. So I was very, very active, and I actually went to college and played tennis my first 2 years at college. And unfortunately, I ended up having 2 knee surgeries that kind of took me out of tennis. The doctors, after the second surgery, basically told me that there wasn't really much more they could do. I have almost no cartilage on the outside part of my knee. And they're not sure if that was, I was born that way, or if it was from some type of acute trauma. I mean, I had been to the ER, I don't know how many times from snowboarding. So, they weren't really sure what was up. And they recommended that I kind of avoid any ballistic activity, any hard impact or anything like that. And that really, it really got me down for a long time. Like, I became pretty depressed and upset. And eventually I just decided that I wasn't going to accept that as an answer. I think many in the carnivore space kind of understand that, except coming from, maybe a disease state or something like that, like not accepting what doctors are telling them. So I started doing a lot of my own research, trying to figure things out for myself. And I actually stumbled across a book by a guy named Mike Robertson. It's called Bulletproof Knees. And I read it, and I started implementing some of the stuff that he recommended. He was a strength coach, and it really helped out a lot. I mean, I had lifted weights in high school because I played football and things like that. And we did a little bit for tennis in college. And it just really started helping. Like, I started, noticing big improvements in my knee and, not having pain near as much. And I slowly started incorporating more activity again. And come to find out, I figured out that this Mike Robertson actually had a gym in the same city where I was in graduate school, which was Indianapolis, Indiana at the time. So I was like, oh my gosh. I mean, he was like a celebrity to me. He's also written for Men's Health, and, he's been in T Nation and a lot of popular kind of fitness media. So I ended up driving up there, meeting him, and they had a week-long kind of free trial membership. So I became a member there, started training there, and I loved it. Like, it immediately, fell in love with it. I saw what they were doing. I became a member long-term, by the way. Kept training there while I was in graduate school, and I was seeing what they were doing for other people at that gym, because this was Indianapolis Fitness and Sports Training, by the way. And it's a kind of a semi-private gym. And one of the other owners, Bill Hartman's a physical therapist. So they work with a lot of people that are in pain, but also they work with pro athletes and you name it. They basically work with them. So it was just really cool, to see them helping other people. And I became very interested in it. And they started recommending things I read, and they became kind of mentors to me. And before I ended up finishing my graduate degree, my master's, which your audience might find funny, was in economics and statistics. So I actually have a background in applied economics, statistics. I was a statistician for a while in graduate school.
Interesting.
And I decided that I wanted to pursue fitness instead. So probably a few weeks before I graduated, I decided I wanted to apply for an internship at the gym. And I told all my professors at graduate school that I was going to go this different route. And they were pretty upset because they had kind of invested a lot in me. I was looking at PhD schools. I thought I was going to go that route. And I just pulled the trigger, and I ended up, becoming an intern there. And then they actually hired me right after that. And I became a strength coach there. So just a crazy string of events, but it worked out really well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And then how did your career kind of evolve from there? How did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, so you kind of mentioned, I now work for Precision Nutrition, which is an online, nutrition company. And I actually started becoming interested in nutrition while I was in my late undergraduate studies, early graduate studies. One other thing I didn't mention is, while I was kind of depressed during all this knee surgery stuff, I actually developed an eating disorder as well. It started, like I said, part of it was I was just really disappointed not being able to do what I was always known for, being an athlete, things like that. Another one was my roommate in college. He was fairly healthy eater. And what I thought was healthy back then was, plain Cheerios, not getting frosted Cheerios. Or, my now wife, she was my girlfriend in high school, her family would have Pop-Tarts without icing on them. And I thought that was like the healthiest thing ever. So I've come from a background of not eating well at all. I mean, I don't know if your audience probably thinks it's a good thing, but I hardly had any vegetables growing up. It was mainly very processed food. SpaghettiOs, pizza, cereal were like my go-tos. And I never had a weight issue. It was just, I was playing tennis, and I just saw that my roommate was eating pretty well. And my girlfriend at the time she also ate pretty well. So I just started kind of making some small changes. Like, I stopped putting cheese on my turkey sandwich. And instead of, the granola with all the sugar on it, I started, getting just plain granola. Things like that. And I basically went the low fat route because, again, I had almost no education in nutrition or what was good. I came from a really small town, and my parents, they're wonderful, but they just didn't know much about nutrition. So I did what I thought was right. And I slowly just started seeing some changes in my body. My abs started popping out a little bit more. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I really had never had body image issues, never had any energy issues, nothing like that. I honestly grew up feeling really good and confident and healthy and things like that. And just slowly over time, it became more and more extreme. I just came, more in control of it. Anyways, I ended up losing probably 50 pounds and ended up at about 125 pounds at 6'2".
Wow.
So got very, very skinny. Yeah. So I went to an eating disorder clinic for a while. I never became an inpatient, but I developed a lot of hormonal issues, like thyroid, testosterone was in the tank, all of these things. And because of that, the the eating disorder clinic I went to, they were just like, let's get you eating, some of the foods you used to enjoy. Like you used to love cereal, let's get you eating cereal again. You used to love, pizza. Let's try to get you including these foods again. And I was really against that. I mean, the more I read and things like that, I was like, that's not the right step. Like I want to gain weight, but not in that way. So again, another kind of funny turn of events, but I read a book called Scrawny to Brawny. It's by John Berardi, who is the owner of Precision Nutrition. Right. And it's a book about, gaining weight, using, lifting weights and eating a ton of food, but, more nutritious foods, things like that. And that was kind of my first step in, learning to eat for fueling my muscle gain that was happening as I was starting to rehab my knee and things. So I kind of followed the meal plan in there, and I actually reached out to John, and he was nice enough to respond back. And, I really saw a lot of progress from that. And as a strength coach, I eventually started my own blog where I largely talked about, strength training and how to do things correctly and stuff like that. And I ended up interviewing a few people from Precision Nutrition. And so I just made a really good connection there. And they had a job posting for a nutrition coach. And I was starting to, again, use more nutrition with my clients. And luckily, they brought me on for an interview, and they decided to hire me, which was a really hard decision. I mean, I loved what I was doing at Indianapolis Fitness and Sports Training. I loved the in-person training, but I just loved the idea also of reaching more people through online coaching. And I always thought I would still kind of coach people in person just occasionally, with the home gym or something like that. So yeah, I took that leap, and that's what I'm doing now, is mainly working for them. And then I also have some of the side gigs like you mentioned.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And what I'm curious about is how you've sought out education and learned where to accept things, because I feel like you have a lot of formal education, both through mostly through these certifications you hold. Precision Nutrition, I know, has a rigorous series of courses, and you've sought out a lot of additional courses too. Where have you accepted the information in those, or in textbooks, or things you've learned, versus questioned it with regards to both fitness and nutrition?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's really hard to navigate, what's right, what's not right. I was very fortunate, again, to, when I first started out at Indianapolis Fitness and Sports Training, like when I was an intern, my degree was not at all in physiology or exercise or biomechanics or anything like that. So when Mike and Bill gave me textbooks or things that they recommended, I was so excited to dive in. And, I felt like they really got me on a good foot to kind of get started, because honestly, I worked with a lot of interns there, and they'd come from a background of physiology or something. And they were kind of bored of, the textbook material, and, they've been taught their one system, and they kind of, expected that to be true. So, just starting out, it was getting that fundamental knowledge. Like, I think it is helpful to have a textbook foundation, depending on, what you're kind of going into. I don't think everyone needs it to be a great coach, not at all. But that at least gave me a framework from which to start reading research and start learning from other people. And I'm also fortunate that I do have the statistics background, and I think that trips up a lot of people because, as we've seen, nutritional epidemiology and just kind of manipulating any data, or, it's so easy to do. And also, I've been involved in research. I have some published research papers that I have my name on and things like that. And it is just, you just kind of see how much more difficult, it is. So I never take data as it is. Like, I really dig into the methods and things like that. And that's been able to force me to question things. So that's been really helpful. But I think also, when you are trying to figure out who to trust, who to look to, I think it's helpful to, for one, see who's making sense. I mean, they should somewhat align with what most of the data is saying. And then also just people who are getting results, and haven't stuck to kind of one dogmatic approach. I think it's really good to look at both sides. And, I think in the carnivore realm, it's kind of, I don't know how to say it. It's, we kind of get in our own little hole and we only see other carnivores and no one else that are getting results. And we just assume that's the only way. And I'm not saying that it's not the best way, nothing like that. It's just, I think it's good to look at both sides and to question, because there are people out there who have tried carnivore and it just didn't work for them. And that's not to say it's because the diet didn't work. It's because for some reason it wasn't sustainable. Like they couldn't just stick to just meat. And maybe that's on them, maybe that, you should push harder and you should be more strict. But some people just aren't going to do that. So, I think it's about being open-minded and just, I've been fortunate again to work with, thousands of clients, because through Precision Nutrition, we've coached that many people. So I've seen the gamut, and I'm also, lucky in that I've worked with both, professional athletes that'll do almost anything to, mom and pop who you have to be more flexible with. They're not always going to follow. There's kind of what's ideal plan. Like maybe I think carnivore is going to be just the perfect plan for someone. But if they're not going to do it, then I have to kind of tweak that a little bit and work with what is reasonable for them, because sustainability is the biggest thing over time.
Absolutely. I think that's so critical. And I was going to ask how you reconcile kind of your experience with carnivore and keto diets, both through research and your personal experience with your work on clients. But I think that really answers it. And I love how you're open-minded about it and willing to adapt your approach to the individual and think about adherence and consistency and all these pieces.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that carnivore, again, I think it could work for everyone, probably. If they could really follow it correctly and make all those choices that are, right for them. But just not everyone's willing to do that. So.
This episode is brought to you by Optimal Carnivore. Optimal Carnivore was created by carnivores for carnivores. They've recently released a new product, a grass-fed bone marrow. It is the whole bone extract, which includes the bone marrow, the cartilage, and collagen peptides. Our ancestors would have eaten the whole animal, including bones, and especially the marrow. All the nutrients and substances that your body needs to build, repair, and maintain your bones, teeth, and connective tissue can come from the bone marrow. It's a complex that contains the same components as home-cooked bone broth, but making bone broth can be a hassle. You have to source high-quality bones, boil them for days, and this is a simple, convenient alternative that's gently freeze-dried so it preserves all the nutrients completely intact. It's perfect for people who are traveling or don't have time to make bone broth themselves. Visit www.amazon.com/optimalcarnivore and use the code carnivore10 to receive 10% off your purchase. Where did you find carnivore, Zach, and why did it enter the picture? Why did you start eating a carnivore-based diet?
Yeah, so, I think I did a lot of damage to my digestion when I went through my eating disorder and I lost a lot of weight. I mentioned that I read Scrawny to Brawny and I started, putting on weight using that meal plan and things like that, and things were going okay. But I eventually just ran into really serious digestive issues. And I also was still trying to come out of some hormonal problems. Like I mentioned, thyroid was really, really tanked. I was on thyroid meds for a long time, and, testosterone was really low. And so I began, kind of looking into research in those kind of realms. And it eventually led me to keto, as you want to call it. I was kind of fortunate that I didn't fall for the, just chug butter and that's it. Again, I think that can, somewhat of that can be okay. But, I actually, I hit on that and it helped my digestion a lot. And my hormones actually started improving. And it was around that time that my wife and I actually got pregnant, and we had been struggling for a long time. And it wasn't until I actually went keto that we actually were able to get pregnant. And I don't know if that was because of keto or not, but it really, made me very curious in that way of eating. And I just started going down that rabbit hole. And eventually, this was a long time ago. I'm trying to think. This would have been, so my son's 3, this would have been around 2015 or so. I probably started keto. And, I was seeing people like Esme LaFleur. I don't know if your audience knows who she is, like in carnivore. And I was reading about them.
Yeah.
And, I'm like everyone else, I thought it was kind of crazy. But my digestion just got so bad that eventually I pulled the trigger and moved to that. And that was the main reason I went that route, was just to see if it would help with my gut health, because I don't have any diagnosed condition, but I will say that I had the highest calprotectin level, which is kind of a standard for gut inflammation that I've ever seen on a test. Wow. I had a colonoscopy after that, but I was actually looking at a paper just before this that I think it's like 45% of people who, have a really high calprotectin level and, tested negative for on their colonoscopy, or everything came back, like they can still be positive for small bowel Crohn's. So once this whole COVID thing is over, I kind of plan to dig into that a little bit more, but I don't know necessarily what that's going to tell me. I'm probably still going to base it on how I feel, but it's just a curiosity thing.
Super interesting. And I've learned this through my wife as well, that so many people with digestive issues that go completely undiagnosed. And even when you've seen a bunch of doctors and specialists, so many times they can just, shrug their shoulders and put their hands up and say, we don't know what this is. You don't fit strictly into the definition for Crohn's, for these different disorders we have. Some of your markers are high. We don't know why. We don't know what's causing it. Here's some drugs you could try. It's like really a giant mystery. I don't know if all branches of medicine are like that, but just one area where I have a little bit more experience, it seems like there's so many unanswered questions.
Yeah. The gut seems to be one area that's just so individual, and it's really hard to navigate the research on that, just because there are so many variables involved. So it really is a self-experiment with that stuff. And so that's basically what I was trying to do. And I also just liked kind of the simplicity. And also I'm very passionate about, sustainable agriculture, even before I was a carnivore. So I don't know, just the idea of, eating meat and, making that kind of the staple instead of, relying on all kinds of vegetables, even when it's winter out and like nothing's, we wouldn't technically have had that available, and, eating an avocado that was shipped from Florida in the winter, just some of that stuff always kind of got to me a little bit in the back of my head. So I kind of like that aspect of it as well.
Yeah, that's great. And how has it worked for you, and how has the diet maybe evolved for you over time?
Yeah. So, I still have issues. I'll be honest. Like, it's not 100% perfect, but it's definitely the best it's ever been. When I do stick strictly to it, and that's most of the time. As of right now, I am including things like a little bit of zucchini and green beans, just because we have a garden. And so, I'm enjoying some of that. My wife just brought home some little, tomatoes, grape tomatoes from her mom's garden. So, I've been, having some of those, and they don't bother me too bad, but I definitely feel better when I am strict carnivore. If we want to get into issues, like when I first started, I definitely had, kind of the loose stool that everyone talks about. But now it just varies. Like, I tend to go back and forth between the two if anything comes up. But for most of the time, it's pretty good. And I'm still continuing to learn about it. I don't know if carnivore is the ultimate solution. I may eventually have to try some other things. I don't know. But I feel good. Especially when I have a good string. And I'll be honest, I haven't tried a strict like beef, water, salt. I think that could potentially work for me. My main vice is coffee. That's the one thing I've not dropped, to be honest. But I think that could potentially be the missing piece. But yeah, I'm not sure. But again, I'm happy overall, and that's why I continue to stick with it and continue to experiment.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's the most critical thing. And what does kind of a day of eating look like for you, in terms of quantity, things you choose to include, not, organs, dairy, types of animals, etc.?
Yeah. So like you said, it has evolved for me a lot. I'm always kind of trying new things out. As of right now, I just recently started including a beef protein powder, only because I train fairly early in the morning. Just I have a son, and it tends to be easier that way. And I am naturally leaner, like I'm trying to add weight. And I do think it's ideal to have some protein before your workout, some type of amino acid in your bloodstream. I'm not against fasting for everyone. I mean, if your goal is just to feel good and, be healthy, and I definitely think you can still build muscle without it. It's just, for me, it gives me a little more energy because I am fairly lean. Fasting just, it doesn't always leave me with the most energy. So, I usually have that with a little bit of MCT powder, pre-workout, maybe add a little bit of creatine, and then I train. And then after I train, I usually have some type of meat. It's usually beef, could be steak, ground beef, roast. We buy a half cow. I mean, that's usually what we do. So I have all kinds of different cuts that I kind of go between. And that, along with that, usually that's between 12 to 16 ounces probably of meat. And then I'll have 3 to 4 eggs with that. And depending on how hungry I am, I may add some butter or suet or extra fat to that. And then dinner is almost exactly the same. I mean, it's usually a little bit more meat, usually a pound to a pound and a half. So I usually have between 250 to 300 grams of protein a day, I would say. Yeah. And also it's fairly fatty, again, depending on, I kind of use fat a little bit as a lever. Like I, use that based on my energy needs. And I always include a lot of organ meats just because I'm kind of weird. Like I really honestly like them. Like I eat liver almost every day. I have sweetbreads. I have kidney. Kidney's my favorite. I have heart. Like I eat sardines, salmon. Again, only because I like it, not necessarily because I feel like I have to. So I don't really kind of measure that. I just include it in my total meat for the day. But yeah, I make that fairly often.
Yeah, sounds great and very like nutritionally complete and fairly similar to my past versions of carnivore. And we've talked about this before, Zach, but you and I both err towards very high protein. Like, how do you think that fits in? Do you think that's a bad thing? Do you think eating like upwards of 4 grams per kilogram of protein per day? I still don't understand people who say like, I have trouble getting a gram per pound on carnivore of protein, a pound of body weight, that is. But like, how do you think about how much protein you ingest and like how you feel eating that much protein?
Yeah, for me, it's just more of, I have very high energy needs. Like I have a lot, and too much fat just doesn't work well for my digestion. To be honest, I think for most people, an ideal template is to keep protein a little bit lower, just because I don't think that we need it necessarily. I don't think it's bad to have it, but I don't really see a need to go over, about a gram per pound or 0.8 grams per pound of lean body mass. But I don't think it's harmful either to go above that if you feel good with it. And if you're not just keeping fat so low because you don't think protein can turn to fat. Because I have seen some in the space that I think, it's not what they believe, but I think their message comes across that way. That like you can eat as much protein as you want and like you'll never get fat, or, that's all you'll need. And that's just, it's not necessarily true. Like you can still gain weight, with an excess of protein and energy. So I don't know if that kind of answers your question. I mean, we can definitely go down many rabbit holes there. Like I've found that it really depends on the person in carnivore. Like some people just feel better with more fat, but I don't think that you should go too low either. Like I do think there is that minimum that you probably should get. And beyond that, if you want to get your energy needs from protein, like I know Kevin Stock you've had on, he tends to do that. For me, I just get ravenous. Like I could literally eat, I bet 6 to 8 like pounds of lean protein. Like I've done it, and I just have this like just insatiable. I could just keep going. Like there's something I'm still hungry for, and my stomach feels awful. So I have to have some added energy, or I'll go over that. And even if it's a fairly fatty cut, I can end up eating. And again, I know it's not all about calories, but I can end up eating a little bit less calories if I include a little more fat than going super lean.
Yeah.
It was interesting because I was listening to your podcast with William Shufelt right before this, and he was mentioning that that's something that he's learned over time is with his shred program. He's now doing like 1-to-1 grams of protein and fat, whereas before he would go really high in protein. But again, it's so individual that I think it just depends. But
yeah. I'm completely with you. I found if I try to go too lean, eating like I have round or even all New York strips or a lot of grass finished meat that's really lean, I get so ravenous and can just eat pounds and pounds. And it's actually I think people would be surprised at how little fat they're eating on carnivore, even when they're eating fattier cuts, because when you cook the meat, especially if you're grilling, a lot of the fat goes away. So it's actually really hard to be at 1-to-1 grams of fat to grams of protein. Like basically, if you take like a grocery store ribeye trimmed by the butcher, not trimmed when you get it, and you cook that on the stove, if a lot of the fat comes out, that's already probably below 1-to-1. And that's like the fattiest cut that most people eat. So I think people would be surprised at how little fat and how much protein they're getting. And then to further emphasize the protein and focus on leaner cuts on carnivore when you have no source of energy except for fat, I think can be problematic.
Yes, I completely agree. Yeah, I think a lot of people overestimate how much energy they're taking in. Because a lot of people will say, well, I'm eating so many more calories now on carnivore. And this is going to sound like I'm against carnivore. Like I'm not at all. Like I love it for so many ways. I follow it myself personally, but you'll see people saying like, I'm eating, just way more calories. But again, like you said, so much of that fat cooks off. And a New York strip, like that does not satiate me. Like it is not fatty enough. But again, my energy needs are fairly high. So I have to add more. But I completely agree with you.
Yeah. And like building on that a little bit, do you think folks can build muscle on a carnivore diet compared to like a higher carb diet?
I do. I definitely think you can build muscle on carnivore. Do I think it's as optimal as including carbs? Honestly, I don't, but not really from a physiology perspective. Like we know that glycogen is really not, we don't use very much glycogen if we are strength training. Like even the most intense weight training session is not going to deplete much glycogen, which is, kind of the glucose within the muscle itself. So if you're just resistance training, trying to build muscle, then again, you don't really need carbs for that. And I don't think you need the insulin from carbs, anything like that. I think the biggest thing that helps is the muscle fullness that you get from like glycogen. And again, there is research showing like, even if you're not eating carbs, you can have almost full muscle glycogen storage, but it just doesn't seem to play out. Like I've worked with people who have been carnivore for quite a while and they feel fairly full, but if you give them a little bit of white rice or something, they feel more full. And the reason that helps is because it does give you better leverage when you are lifting. And if you have better leverage, you're going to tend to lift a little bit more weight, and that's going to produce more tension on the muscle. And that is the biggest stimulus for muscle hypertrophy. So I don't know, maybe someone out there has figured out a way to get enough fullness. I have consumed upwards of 30 plus grams of salt, because I know many will say, well, then you're just not eating enough salt or enough protein to provide the gluconeogenic, precursors. And I've tried all of it and I don't quite have the same fullness. So the difference it's going to make, I think, is very, very minor if you're able to eat enough on carnivore to build muscle. So for most, I don't think it's going to make a difference. But if you're trying to look for that little bitty edge, then I think it could potentially help to have some carbs.
Interesting. So you're saying two things. One, carbs can help you eat more. Two, carbs can provide almost like a super compensatory glycolytic effect. Is that what you mean by leverage, or how would you explain that?
Yeah, you basically are going to store more water and glycogen in the cell, because we know for every gram of glucose, that's stored within the cell, you store about 3 grams of water. So you're just going to retain more water and more fullness. And, imagine if you're a power lifter and you're bench pressing. One of the first things that powerlifters will say is if they cut weight, they immediately lose strength in the bench press because of leverage. Like it's kind of hard to explain. It has to do with biomechanics, but you basically can just produce a little more force with the muscle itself. So having more fullness will allow you to use more weight. And that's not with all lifts. I mean, if you're doing just calisthenics, that's not necessarily true, but in deadlifting, it's not necessarily true, but certain lifts, it's definitely true that if you have a little more weight on you, you're going to be able to lift more. And that's even true if it's just fat tissue. Like, I've heard some power lifters, Dave Tate, if you're familiar, like he talks about it. If you just get a big bloat, like you just eat a lot of junk and get fat, it's not even muscle, but you can lift more weight. So that is the main reason I think it can potentially help. But again, like I said, for most people, that's going to make just the minor difference.
Yeah, I think Mark Bell talks about that a lot too.
Yes.
And how do you think about bulking and cutting on carnivore or keto? What are some strategies people can employ? Just kind of like basic tips or ways you would structure a cut or bulk.
Yeah. So I think for everyone, I think you got to set protein first. And for most people, again, it's about at a minimum, 0.8 grams per pound of lean body tissue, somewhere around there. Like I think Ted Naiman's the one who says, 1 gram per pound of ideal body weight. I think that's pretty helpful. I do think you need that minimum amount of protein. I know, I am a big fan of Robert Sykes. He's a keto bodybuilder, and I know he goes very low in protein and seems to have no issues with it. But I don't know. I'm scared to do that. I've never actually recommended that for a person, so I can't say it doesn't work. It's just most of the research I've seen and most anecdotes I've heard about, it's a good target to shoot for. And I think it's just, I don't know, it's easier to eat like a normal diet, I guess. If you're only eating 60 grams of protein or something, it's just, you're going to be eating mostly fat. And that's, I don't know, it just seems socially hard. But so, and beyond that, I really think it's kind of experimenting. I think there is a minimum fat intake you need to feel good. And for most people, a minimum fat intake is probably about 50 grams long term. And that's super low. So, if you want to, increase the amount of food you're eating because you're not gaining weight and you're trying to bulk, then I think fat's going to be a little bit easier because it's more, calorically dense. You can get that in easier. Again, if you're eating just a ton of lean meat, you're going to have to eat 5, 6, 7 pounds. And that's just an insane amount. And I still think you're going to have some hunger issues and energy issues. And if you're cutting, that's where I think it even more experimenting comes into play. Again, I've worked with some people who they hit that minimum protein and they feel way more satiated if they get more fat. So I definitely don't think the whole, like high protein, go low fat, like protein sparing modified fast. I don't find that works very well for a lot of people, even short term. They're just not able to follow it unless they're pretty extreme already in their personality and they have quite a bit of experience. So for most, I like them just to keep protein at that minimum and ramp up fat to make up kind of their energy needs. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. And I think sounds like an approach that you've developed based on working with a ton of people and doing a lot of research. And who do you think needs to be strict carnivore versus adding in other foods? And maybe what would some of your first additional foods to add be versus last to a strict carnivore or meat-based diet?
Yeah, I think the research is in its infancy. Like I said, I've seen millions of anecdotes of carnivore helping with so many autoimmune conditions that I would say that's probably the first group of people that would do well with it. Anyone with digestive issues, we've seen a lot of that. I think carnivore is the ultimate elimination diet. I think it's really helpful for that just to start as a baseline. But I don't see very many people that need to be strict carnivore forever. It's okay if you want to be. I think you can be healthy long-term that way. I see no issues with that. but I think it's going to be very rare that someone needs to stay a strict carnivore for a long period of time. Unless they are just, really battling these autoimmune conditions. But I think that's where it's an experiment, right? You eliminate and then you slowly add things in. And if it doesn't work, then, to go back to the baseline, and then you can start in with another food if you want to. Again, some people are happy. They don't need to add anything in. So that's what I would say. I don't really know, but I would say autoimmune and digestive issues that aren't autoimmune in nature are probably the first place to start. Maybe mood disorders as well. Seen a lot of benefits in that camp. So anybody like that, I would encourage to at least give it a shot and see if you notice improvements. As far as what would be my additional foods to add first, I think that's really tricky. And it's really kind of the person experiment again. Like for me, zucchini has been super easy for me to digest. I skin it, I cook it like crazy. I think that can be a good one. It seems a lot of people are having success adding honey in. It seems to be an easy source. I'm trying to think of some other ones. I mean, green beans have been pretty easy one for me. I like local, I like what's in season. So I like including some seasonal, like low fiber at first is probably a good idea, but really no strict guidelines. I like Paul Saladino's recommendations in his book about what to try first. I think probably cooked carrots is another good one. Cooked squashes that are, peeled and seeded. I think
those are all great recommendations for places to start for folks. And maybe what are some pieces of the carnivore diet that you're still trying to learn for yourself, either through other carnivores or self-experimentation? What are you trying to figure out?
Electrolytes and fluid is probably something I still have not figured out for myself. I don't know if it's still part of my digestion, but I go through periods where I feel like I have just a lot of water retention, and then periods where I don't. And, I kind of feel like I understand the physiology and I can usually get it back to normal, but something throws me off a lot. Like if I have a day that, maybe it's a lot hotter and I know that I need to include more salt or something like that, I'll do it. But if it's not just timed right, I feel like I still struggle figuring that out. And helping clients with that too can be challenging for some because it seems like people are just different in terms of what they need and how much fluid they're starting with and things like that. Because for a while, I really got in a vicious cycle of I would drink just a ton of water because I was really thirsty. And then when it was time for my meal, I was so craving salt. So then I would pour I think you had the same experience, Scott. And then I would use a ton of salt. And then an hour or two later, I was dying of thirst. So then I would drink. So, it just depends on your baseline fluid intake and then, things like that. So electrolytes are a big one. I think timing of protein and fat just in relation to bed. When I get up around my workout, I'm still trying to figure out a little bit because with my wife and my son, it's kind of hard for me not to have a fairly late dinner. And I know meat and fat are just slower digesting. So it'd be ideal for me not to have a very big meal before bed, but it's hard not to eat, with them as well. So just some of the timing stuff is still something I'm experimenting with. I think in an ideal world, you would front load most of your intake, space it out a little bit, but with my schedule, that just makes it really hard.
Yeah, completely agree. And I've done an episode on salt that people can refer to, but had the exact same problem as you. And you mentioned sustainability. So I really want to touch on this, Zack. How did you become interested in ranching? What are your goals there? And then I think really importantly, many listeners can probably relate to how you're feeling and what you're doing. So how are you learning or dipping your toes into ranching and getting up to speed on it?
Yeah, so there's a few different angles I can come at on this. Again, I'm very passionate about just sustainability, the environment. I grew up in a really small town, like a farm town, and there's farms all around me. I know a lot of the farmers. A lot of the kids I grew up with, their parents were into that, and Wendell Berry. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he had a big influence on me when I was growing up. I was a bit of I had this phase where I was kind of like I wanted to be like a homesteader and live off the land and be a snowboard bum. And I don't know, I just went through this phase. So anyways, I read him a lot. He had a big influence on me. I really like his thoughts on economics, having my background in economics. Like I really like the idea of supporting local economies and things like that. And my parents both grew up on a farm. My mom actually lived off the land growing up. Like they butchered their own animals. She milked cows. Like they didn't go to a grocery store. So, I've been able to learn a lot from her, and seeing her garden and things like that has really had an influence on me. And then just recently, not recently, but, ever since I've been kind of an online coach, I've missed being connected to people and people around me. And like I said, kind of the local economy. I kind of lived in this internet world for a long time, and I missed out, I feel, on a lot of social connection. And farming is just, I'm very fortunate. My dad owns a little over 200 acres. He actually has cows that someone leases his land, and they kind of move and rotate them on his land. And just being out there, it just opened my eyes to, I don't know, how much more present I am, and how just less stressed and anxious I feel when I'm not plugged into the computer and on my phone and things like that. So that has been a really big part of it that's opened my eyes to being interested in pursuing this. The carnivore diet has definitely, saved a little bit of money, no doubt. And also just because I think meat-based nutrition is just very important. And again, the community I live in, just pretty poor area, like people aren't very healthy or aware. So I'd love to educate others on the topic and, give them a good source of meat and, things like that. And then lastly, I've always, I don't know, one thing I've really struggled with being a dad is the balance between my job. Like I love what I do. Like everything I've done, I've always wanted to be the best at it. Like no matter what, I'm just driven that way. And ever since I've had my son, it's been a hard balance of, being the best at what I do, because that takes a lot of time, and also being there and being a good dad and being present for my son. And so I was actually just talking to someone, not too long ago about how to think about that, like how I could do better about that. And they said to find, activities or things that, this makes sense, obviously, but that we can do together, or that I can involve them in my work in some way. And I couldn't really think about ways to do that with my job necessarily, besides, my son lifting weights with me or something like that, which I definitely plan to do. But farming is something I think would be so wonderful to just do that with my son, and just have him grow up around land and learning some of those valuable skills of hard work and being outside and, all of that. I think there's just so many benefits to him that I'm really excited about that. He loves tractors and lawnmowers. And that's his favorite thing when we go out to my dad's land, and he just, does that. So I'm in a, very fortunate position, like I said, where my dad has the land, and I can, hopefully start doing that here soon. I already have 5 cows that someone is rotating for me right now, but I plan to take that over soon and hopefully build from there.
Yeah, that's awesome. And just hearing you talk about it, and thank you for sharing that, Zack. I can hear the passion and enthusiasm in your voice and the excitement, which is really great. And I like the way you framed it about things that you can do and learn with your son and accomplish together, and also getting back to the physical. I think, especially during lockdown and in today's age of social media, people really feel disconnected from that. And so I think a lot of people I certainly can relate to what you're saying.
Yeah. It's I'm excited about it. Like I said, I love the strength and conditioning. I love the nutrition. I plan to keep doing that. That's just another kind of side thing that I think, again, will make me kind of closer to my family, my community, and just kind of give back in ways.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, this has been excellent, Zack. Really appreciate you coming on. I think folks will really enjoy getting to know you and hearing about some of your expertise in fitness and nutrition. Where can people find out more about you? And I'll, of course, provide links to all of that in the show notes and the website post.
Yeah, so I actually have a website. It's Z and then my last name Moore.com. And I haven't posted on it forever. It's got some blog posts from probably 2015 on it. But you can, find a little bit more about me there. I also have, the Instagram account you mentioned, the ZM Carnivore. I think it's ZM_Carnivore. And I'm not super active there, but I'm always open to messages. I love hearing from other people. I'm always kind of looking in on things. I just don't post a lot. So definitely feel free to reach me there. I'm on Facebook as well, Zack Moore. You can link to any of that stuff. And if any of your listeners have questions or just want to connect, I love hearing from other people. And hopefully after this COVID thing, we'll be able to do some more carnivore conferences and things like that. And just be fun to meet more of the community.
Yeah, absolutely. That's how we met. And that was so great back in Boulder. Great.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again for the time today, Zack, and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, same to you, Scott. Thanks a lot.
Bye. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Carnivore Cast. If you enjoyed this episode, please review on iTunes. It really helps us out. And share it with a friend. What questions would you like answered? Or who would you like to hear from in the carnivore research community? You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at CarnivoreCast or go to carnivorecast.com. You can also email me at info@carnivorecast.com. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep it carnivore.